Welcome back, everyone. We're going to finish our conference today with a panel discussion. And I'd like to invite our panelists to join me on stage, please. Yes, Jen, that means you. So our panel this afternoon will focus on advanced energy technology funding and permitting. And I did not give a proper introduction to Brian earlier, who is going to serve as our moderator, so I'll do that now. He's of counsel in the Energy and Mining Group at Davis, Graham, and Stubbs. He focuses his practice on upstream and midstream transactional matters for the oil and gas industry. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian to introduce our panelists.
Hello. Thanks, Kara. I'm really excited to introduce this panel today on advanced energy technology projects. We're going to walk through basically company readiness, community readiness, and government readiness. Starting the discussion on federal funding is going to be Erik Holt with Frontier Carbon Solutions. He's involved in developing carbon storage project here in Wyoming. Afterwards, it's going to be Maddie Lewis, who's with the School of Energy Resources here at the university. She'll be discussing community development plans as well as environmental justice. Before opening it up to questions, Jen Thomson is going to be doing presenting on federal and state coordination. I got it, that one right. So right now I'm going to hand it off to Erik to start his presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brian. There we go. So real quick, I want to give an introduction to Frontier Carbon Solutions and who we are and what we do. We are a CCS project developer, and what that means is that we are in the customer service business. And who are our customers? Our customers are industrial emitters, such as power plants, gas processors, industrial miners, all these folks who have a very large carbon footprint. And what service do we provide? We help them eliminate their carbon emissions by capturing, transporting, storing, and or utilizing their CO2. So this graph right here is a pretty simple picture that demonstrates a pretty complicated technical process. If it looks like what you see when you think of an oil or gas well, it's because it's practically the same. But instead of producing the hydrocarbons, we're actually injecting CO2 into these deep saline reservoirs for them to be permanently stored. And so for Frontier, for us to be in the CCS business, we have planted our flag in Wyoming. And why Wyoming? Well, we like Wyoming because unlike Dallas's Cowboys, Wyoming's Cowboys actually win great games against Bay Area opponents. So thank you. Yeah, look, I'm injecting football into a CLE conference. It's a CLE conversation about federal funding, so take it for what it's worth. But we're very intentional in picking Wyoming because Wyoming is America's treasure trove of natural resources. It has oil and gas, it has coal, it has trona. I mean, I didn't even know of trona until about a year and a half ago, and it is like the miracle mineral. I mean, it is amazing. All the glass that's in your cell phone, all the commercial glass that you see on buildings comes from trona that is very much likely was mined in Southwest Wyoming. It has helium, it has lithium, all the ingredients that you're going to need as we look forward into a net zero economy. All the ingredients are right here in Wyoming, and that's why we wanted to be here, is to help keep these Wyoming businesses competitive in a net zero environment. Secondly, Wyoming has world-class geology with its Green River Basin, with its Powder River Basin. This is where you want to be as far as having the storage capacity on the onshore U.S. And lastly, and it's the last one, surely not least, but I don't know of a jurisdiction in the United States that has been more forward-thinking, more constructive, and has produced a premier regulatory framework like Wyoming. I mean, thanks to folks, I don't think Senator Dockstader, I think he's already gone, but working with folks like Randall Luthi, And Todd Parfit, who, as you know, Wyoming is one of 2 jurisdictions that has primacy over the Class 6 permit, which is that's a deal breaker. You know, not a deal breaker, but that's you know what I mean. Yeah. So this is our project. This is the Sweetwater. This is Frontier Sweetwater Carbon Storage Hub. You can see here we are rightfully at the intersection of Sweetwater, Lincoln, and Uinta County. And if any of you are landmen, you know if you get to file one thing, you get to file it 3 times, which is a lot of fun. But you can see here we have our bottom hole locations for our 3 Class 6 permit wells that we are now in public comments with. So we're really excited to see those come to fruition here in the near future. So now on to the federal funding. And rather than just kind of walk through like what it is and what we're doing, what I thought would be a lot easier would be just to kind of walk through a case study of our recent award that was announced here last May, which is we were awarded with the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, we were awarded $40.5 million as part of the DOE's Carbon Safe Initiative. What the Carbon Safe Initiative is it's the Storage Assurance Facility Enterprise. And so we, as part of our project, we were able to apply with the School of Energy Resources for this grant, and we're awarded $40 million. But where does that all start? So if this is the finish line, what is your starting block? Well, since we've been in a company for 2.5 years, we have been tracking legislation on a regular basis for any new funding, anything related to carbon management. And in the last 2 years, we've had 2 huge pieces of legislation come through that were critical for our business, which is one was the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then also the Inflation Reduction Act. But this particular award came from funds legislated in the BIL. And the BIL awarded or basically delegated $62 million to the U.S. Department of Energy, of which the DOE then allocated $2.25 billion to the Carbon Safe Initiative, and of that, DOE then awarded 9 projects for $240 million, of which we were one of them, which is then comes to that funding opportunity announcement. Or you can just go to grants.gov, and that's where all the FOAs are. You don't have to necessarily go through that whole process, but if you want to, it's fine. So let's just look at what the funding opportunity announcement looks like. This is page 1 of 257-page announcement that was published by the DOE. And what this says is that it officially gives the primer of what it's looking for, when the due date, when it's established, and when the notifications plan to be announced, but also when the deadline is to apply. But before you can even apply for page 1, I don't know how many of you do banking or do banking law or anything like that. You'll know KYC, know your customer. Well, this is KYC on steroids. You have to register with a system of award management. You have to obtain a unique entity identifier. There's just a score of different things that you have to register for and get clearance for to be able to earn an award from the federal government. But there's a shortcut to that, and I'll get to in a second. So the second part is kind of understanding exactly what you're applying for. For this specific award, we were phase 3. This was under phase 3 of the Carbon Safe Initiative. And of the phase 3, this was more detailed into site characterization, as in where are the projects, what do you plan to do to determine that you have the pore space capacity to permanently store the CO2. And so that I'd say the big takeaway here is that you have to know who your audience is. This Carbon Safe Initiative is managed by the National Energy Technology Laboratory. These are highly sophisticated scientists. So you cannot over data dump them. You have to be able to speak their language, and they are going to want to. So we presented tons and tons of science. We presented tons and tons of data related to our subsurface logs and whatnot. We presented tons of budgets and capital costs. So there wasn't anything that was too detailed for this application. And secondly, I think it's important when you think about knowing your audience, as you look at these phase fours, the 5 different phases, including the 3.5, if you look at these different phases, you see there's one common denominator between all of them that they all are looking for when they make considerations as far as awards. And one is community benefits plan. And so again, you cannot over detail how you plan to make a positive and social impact as it relates to the award. And finally, going back, when you think about how you want to apply for these things, I would say the trick here is to have a good partner. But if you're really blessed, you'll get the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources and folks like Holly and her team who have just been outstanding. Frontier has been so blessed to have them and to have the support of folks like Mr. Luthi and the governor's office, and just people who believe in this and are passionate about it. And that's important because the School of Wyoming, the University of Wyoming has already been awarded primary beneficiary of these awards, which means that saved us months and months of time and attention and energy for Frontier to apply to become primary. So we were able to just really do this in tandem with them, and we couldn't have had a better partner. So that's, for us, that's how we got to where we are today. And so I would just say, I don't want to make this too political, but as we get into 2024 and we think about this upcoming election, I hope that you would think about it the way I think about it, is make America more like Wyoming. So that's because this is where we want to be, and this is where we're excited to be. So thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
They trying to? Okay, thank you. Okay, it's wonderful to be here with you all today. My name is Madeline Lewis. I'm a policy and law research scientist with the School of Energy Resources, which I think needs no introduction today, but I thought I'd give a few opening remarks about how I found myself working on DOE community benefits plans. So I graduated from the UW College of Law with a joint degree in energy, environment, and natural resources in 2019. I clerked for Judge Friedenthal for a year for the U.S. District Court, followed by a couple years at the law firm of Crowley Fleck. And I joined the School of Energy Resources about a year ago. We're in this phase of unprecedented growth with a lot of opportunity. So one of the first projects that they had me working on was, how do we figure out these community benefits plans and support our project partners who are applying for some unprecedented federal funding. So I'll start out by saying just the amount of money that was made available for low carbon energy projects under the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the BIL, was in the realm of hundreds of billions of dollars, $400 billion, I think. And so that funding is going towards projects across the country, and especially in Wyoming, we've had some great success, but looking at infrastructure for carbon capture, nuclear growth, solar, wind, and hydrogen production. And these have just been great opportunities for businesses that want to take advantage of Wyoming's massive energy resources. So with this funding, though, there have been challenges related to determining what environmental justice means for communities, as the Biden administration has made that a policy priority for its administration. So for instance, it contemplates not only this massive wide-scale transition to low carbon energy, but they're also asking us to implement environmental justice and carry out community engagement with every project. So within days of taking office, it was January 27th, 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, titled Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. which signaled the administration's vision for this status quo in which disadvantaged communities or marginalized communities, and we'll talk about what the administration believes that means, in which those communities are actively benefiting from certain federal funding, which is a lot of the funding for energy projects under the Inflation Reduction Act. So one of the landmarks of that executive order was the Justice 40 initiative, which requires that a minimum of 40% of all benefits from certain federal funding flow to disadvantaged communities. So I'll just start here and explain what a community benefits plan is and how it was geared to help implement the Biden administration's goals in terms of environmental justice and community engagement. So Erik gave a wonderful introduction to the process for applying for federal funding, and it was great to go through that process with Frontier Carbon Solutions together. So community benefits plans, as I noted, because they're a product of the Biden administration, they're new, and it's not always been clear what they look like. It's like every funding opportunity announcement has been a bit of a snowflake where no plan is like another. And it seems like the Department of Energy has kind of winnowed down its expectations and figured out a little bit more specifically what it's looking for since we went through the process of applying for so many grants last fall. But depending on the phase of the project, so the technical readiness level and what phase of funding the project is seeking, community benefits plans may be as simple as answering questionnaires about what the applicant intends to do in terms of providing jobs, or what the environmental impacts of the proposed technology would be, and it can be pretty short. There are also plan development proposals, which say that these are project partners we could envision working with in communities, and it doesn't have to be full-fledged, but a full plan asks for specific milestones about specific goals that the project team is going to execute and implement, on what timeline, who the partners are going to be, and to meet the Justice 40 initiative, you also have to say how certain communities are going to benefit from those milestones. So I think, as one of our earlier speakers, John Latinsky, noted today, CBP's community benefits plans are generally scored about 10 to 20% of the entire award criteria, which is significant. So luckily, in this spring in 2023, DOE released a template that will help structure plan development. I'm sure that they were getting a lot of different formats that describe community benefits plans in 100 different ways, because it wasn't always clear, but luckily we've received a little bit more guidance. So as I noted, the idea of community benefits plans has traced back to the administration's focus on environmental justice. So how DOE defines that, and this definition is borrowed from EPA from, I believe, the late 1990s. Environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So fair treatment is the idea that no community should bear a disproportionate burden of negative environmental consequences resulting from infrastructure. And fair treatment also means that communities that have been disadvantaged in the past for cultural, societal, or other economic reasons, that they specifically don't face continuing disproportionate harms. And then meaningful involvement is this procedural element that emphasizes the importance of community engagement and making sure that projects have social license to operate in the communities that they're working in. So historically, this definition of environmental justice, it traces back to I believe the early 1980s in Warren County, North Carolina. There was a toxic waste landfill that wasn't wanted by a community there that was highly rural and a large concentration of African-American residents. And that's where the movement kind of started. And it's been interesting to apply it in this context and see what environmental justice would mean to communities in Wyoming that largely see energy as a benefit rather than something that's a burden. So there are generally 4 plan components, and like I said, there were different iterations of plan proposals that kind of change these around, but this is what DOE has landed on, and these are they're framed around the core policy priorities of the Biden administration for energy development. So a community benefits plan will in general have a section on community and labor engagement, investment in the American workforce, advancement of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, otherwise known as DEIA, and implementation of the Justice 40 initiative that I discussed. So I'll just provide some context on each of these. So the community, labor, and stakeholder engagement plan, it's often we've drafted it as kind of a narrative to describe, you know, the community that we're working in and what it actually looks like on the ground there. So DOE will often ask for, you know, prior and ongoing efforts to engage the communities that are involved, including tribes and labor stakeholders. So for an organization like SER that already does so much work across the state and in so many different communities, we've kind of been at an advantage there to be able to say that, you know, we have a longstanding connection with a lot of the communities that we're proposing to work in. And luckily, many of our project partners also have an existing presence and have a positive relationship with their communities. They'll also ask for a social characterization assessment. So this is kind of a demographic overview of the community. It describes, you know, the history. So for instance, we would emphasize Gillette's relationship with coal and the different organizations in Gillette that are involved in decision-making for the community and what kind of values and mechanisms for decision-making are prioritized. Stakeholder analysis is another one. So in general, we just provide a list of organizations, both across the state and specific to the project community that either, you know, want to be at the table and have expressed that, or that we believe should be at the table and that will be engaged with throughout the process. And finally, community support. So we rely on, you know, organizations like the Business Council to voice support for a project where they feel that it's something that would benefit the state. And those letters of support have been critical, but also they want to know that the community itself there, so specific project communities, not only support the project now, but that they'll have opportunities to have this two-way channel of engagement in the future as the project develops, and what mechanisms does the team have in place to make sure that community feedback can actually be incorporated. So the next component of the plan is generally the investing in the American workforce, otherwise known as the Quality Jobs Plan. So as noted here, applicants should describe their plans to attract, train, and retain a skilled and well-qualified workforce to ensure project stability, continuity, and success. So this plan component is pretty multidimensional. It asks not only about what jobs will be created by the specific project, but also what is the potential for jobs in this industry or this technology in general, what jobs will be created specifically during construction. It also asks, you know, how do you plan to recruit workers from the local community who, you know, instead of bringing in workers from someplace else, how do the jobs created in those communities actually stay there and benefit the people already living there? And so the idea is to describe both negative and positive impacts. We've had a hard time thinking of negative impacts for the most part for job creation in relatively high paying industries in the energy sector across the state. And one thing that the Biden administration has also asked for is a way to ensure union participation and in right to work states like Wyoming, that may look a little bit differently. So again, it's been trying to figure out, you know, what works for Wyoming. Next is the diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility plan. So this is a plan component that's both inward facing and outward facing. It will describe the actions the applicant will take to foster a welcoming and inclusive environment, support people from underrepresented groups in STEM and or applicable workforces, advance equity, and encourage the inclusion of individuals from these groups in the project. So not only do these plans ask for how does the project team, whether it be the team of researchers at SER or the team of workers in Gillette who are contributing on the ground to a project, what does DEIA look like within our team, but also how do we see an opportunity to promote DEIA and accessibility and job growth across the industry and the development of the technologies that progresses. So in general, they'll ask us for a DEIA vision statement, which is similar to a mission statement, and an initial assessment of prior and ongoing efforts by the project team to incorporate DEIA. And this is where DOE will often ask for SMART milestones. So those include specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So they ask, what is a specific step that you'll take to ensure that DEIA is actively being pursued on your team or in the deployment of this technology. And then finally, they'll ask for a resource summary, which asks, who are the staff who will be contributing to DEIA efforts? What facilities do you have available? In general, that's, just our offices and the university facilities in general. And increasingly, especially with their template, they're asking for, what is a dollar amount that the team will be contributing for these efforts and to ensure that DEIA is represented. Finally, the Justice 40 Initiative Plan, which has a lot of overlap with all the plans I've discussed already. This is that requirement that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. So this is a multi-step process that has been, again, difficult to figure out how it will work exactly in Wyoming. But in general, the first step is to identify disadvantaged communities. So using GIS screening tools that are, available by a growing number of agencies now. I think DOE has its own. The White House Center on Environmental Quality has one. EPA has its EJ screen tool, which was kind of the groundbreaking tool. They ask to identify, communities that either have not a lot of job growth or a high rate of unemployment. What communities have already been exposed to environmental hazards and what communities, in particular for energy communities, like I think the entire state of Wyoming is designated as an energy community. How would we benefit from diversification of our energy sector? And the assessment tools that agencies have provided are a little bit difficult for Wyoming. They're generally on a county level basis, and it seems to me like they were created for populations that have in general a higher population density than we do here in Wyoming. So it's not clear what value these are of. And for a lot of communities, it could be a stigma to be labeled disadvantaged. And we have to think critically about, what that actually means for DOE and what they're looking for versus, what things actually look like on the ground. So for instance, EJ Screen will point out that the Western Hills neighborhood in Cheyenne is a disadvantaged community. And for those of you who maybe drove over from Cheyenne today, you might think that that's a little odd. So that's one way in which it's not quite working, and we're working with DOE to find a system that works better for Wyoming. And then next, once any such communities are identified, we conduct an assessment of the project benefits. So how will we ensure that benefits, whether it be job or revenue, flow to communities that qualify as disadvantaged within DOE's terms, and an assessment of negative impacts. So it's just a candid look at, should this technology be developed, what negative impacts could result to communities that are designated as disadvantaged. So I believe that's about it. This is the last slide I have that's just about the importance of screening tools. When you put a hard percentage on something so vague as benefits from federal funding, it's difficult to know exactly how we're going to, show DOE that those communities are benefiting at that metric. And so increasingly, there's a number of cumulative impact analyses that are helpful. These GIS tools are evolving in ways that can tell a story more for rural communities that's a little bit better fit. And I think in general, we've struggled to show DOE just that, Wyoming does have a different set of concerns, and it does have this interest in growing its energy sector. I think it was either Holly or Kara at the beginning of the session today mentioned that our most recent social license survey that came out of the School of Energy Resources noted that, one thing we can all agree on is that Wyoming is an energy state. And so, just showing that that's true and that people are valuing the development of these industries is going to be key. All right, thank you.
So I'd first like to say thank you one more time to the university, the College of Law, the SER, and the Hobbs School for hosting this meeting, and to Temple, Christine, and Emily for their work putting it together, and for Kara stepping in. I think she's done a lovely job today keeping us on track. My name is Jen Thomson. I work in the governor's office as the major projects manager, and just as a background of that position, a couple years ago, the governor asked the legislature, and the legislature actually funded my position. And my position was created with the idea that we have all of these mega projects with federal funding behind them coming into our state. And are we coordinated as a state to ensure that those projects get across the line, and that if there's any hiccups, it's not the state's problem that caused the hiccup? And beyond those projects, what can the state get from those projects? What else can we as a state potentially look at beyond just these large mega projects? So the areas that I focus on are nuclear, hydrogen, critical minerals. And then because of the review and the work we've been doing, a lot of my focus has also been on the environmental justice policy, and then grants, both at a federal level, but then at a state level for community readiness. So I'm going to just do a quick overview of the nuclear projects. So nuclear isn't new to Wyoming. In 1962, Wyoming actually housed a nuclear reactor during the Cold War, and then that was decommissioned. We also are home, as we heard earlier today, to the largest uranium industry in the United States. And a couple years ago, the Department of Energy announced a funding opportunity for an advanced reactor project. So the industry is looking at starting to expand from these light water reactors that we're all used to seeing, these big, huge projects for utility purposes, into small and micro reactors that can be used for a number of different purposes. Typically, that research has been in the DoD space, but now they're looking at commercialization of it. So under that DOE nuclear program, TerraPower was awarded just over $2 billion for their $4 billion project. And that funding came out of the Nuclear Energy Office, and now sits with the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And it's a 50-50% investment between the two. And when TerraPower received the money, they looked across the country to say, where should we put this project? And they identified Kemmer, Wyoming as the location because of the geology that we have, that it was, it had a coal-based utility plant that was looking at converting to some other source. Kemmer is an energy community with a high energy IQ, and Wyoming as a state, they saw us as a solution-oriented permitting state, a state where we like to get things done. Director Parfit and others talked about that throughout the day. So then we come to the state. So what can the state do? What should the state be doing to enable this project to move forward? And we pulled together all of the state agencies that either have a permitting responsibility or they might have a strategy responsibility, economic development responsibility, to be able to work together, share their roles and responsibilities, and just ensure that we have some collaboration as we move into this re-emerging permitting space for nuclear in the state. Our group meets regularly. We meet every month to talk about what's going on in the nuclear space, what's happening on the TerraPower project. We also, the agencies provide regular updates into the governor's office. UWSER through Tara Rigetti and her team and Kara Fornstrom give us regular updates on the regulatory landscape and the research space. We have WBC on here who does our development, recruiting, and the community engagements. The Wyoming Energy Authority does work around our strategy and additional industrial development. So that goes into that space of what else can we get beyond just the TerraPower project? Where else should we be looking in the nuclear space? As I mentioned, DEQ, they're our lead regulating agency, and I'll get to that next. And then these other agencies also play important permitting roles, sometimes in their relationships with the federal agencies, or they might have future oversight. So YDOT, for example, had to permit the turning lane into the site. They're at Kemmer, and the Game and Fish and YDOT are working also on wildlife mitigation. We also can't do this. One thing we also recognize is we can't do it and be effective if we do it in a vacuum. That's why we look to our partners to also help us in these spaces, especially when it's new technologies. And so I've listed a few of our partners that we have who assist us in doing education at the community level with our legislators across our government agencies, and quite frankly, across the United States and the globe about this project and Wyoming's how we are part of the project. So on the nuclear side, it's different than other projects because in our the legislature passed some specific language relating to nuclear reactors. At a federal level, nuclear reactors are have oversight by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And at the state level, our statute actually says that the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act will only apply to the extent that those provisions don't interfere with, contradict, and duplicate any requirements of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So this really is an important statute because it allows us to streamline the role of the state so that the state isn't recreating a wheel that is already being developed by the federal agencies. This project is slightly different than some of the other ones that have the federal funding because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and OSED actually have non-aligning statutes at a federal level. So that's where we're seeing some of the issues arising because OSED is going to do some NEPA work ahead of the NRC doing NEPA work. So we're actually going to see NEPA being replicated at a federal level, but thankfully we're going to be able to streamline it when we come to the state level. We also have a close working relationship, as Director Parfit mentioned earlier. There's primacy here in the state with the NRC, and because of that primacy, we've had a great working relationship through the years with the NRC, and that's really allowing us as a state to have government to government conversations. They've been frank conversations that allow are getting us to the place of understanding where the Industrial Siting Act provisions do not interfere with, contradict, or duplicate. And so we can clarify that information and know exactly the ask that the state will have of the project. So again, I'd like to say thank you to DEQ for the next couple slides. I was asked to share some information as well on industrial siting. Because outside of nuclear, the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act is an important component of these large projects. And historically, this was created in 1975, so just after the creation of the DEQ. And it provides the mechanism to assess and control our adverse effects of major industrial activities from an environmental, social, and economic conditions. An important component of the act is that it streamlines the permitting process in the state because it limits review from local and state entities to only those that after the industrial siting permit is given to only those by PSC and the DEQ. It's not to say that our other agencies aren't involved. They are. We have 19 agencies that are involved with the DEQ during this process and are able to comment and put their needs inside of the permit that you receive from the industrial siting division. But it allows you to only have to go to that one location within the state, which is helpful. Impact assistance is really an important component as well that the industrial siting division works on. This slide I wanted to give you some information about where you can find the details about the Industrial Development Information and Siting Act. And then there are a couple changes that are significant in 2015 and 2022 about our community impact assistance and the levels for community impact assistance. This is this is important. So this is the part about what triggers the industrial siting. So if your project is over $271 million in estimated construction materials, then the industrial siting will be triggered. But what I will caution you all is don't look at your project and say, oh, I think I'm below it, so I shouldn't go in. That is not what this is trying to tell you. What we are wanting you to do, and what I highly encourage everyone to do, is actually to talk to the DEQ. Let them know what your project is. So in the process, the very first step of the process is that you can request an information meeting. So request that meeting. It's informal. You talk about your project. And if it might be jurisdictional, then you move into the formal jurisdictional meeting. And at that jurisdictional meeting, you will receive a letter following that meeting from the DEQ that tells you if you are within the jurisdiction or not of the ISD. And that just will give you surety to your project. So a lot of what we are trying to do is just give a surety to your companies and to people that come into the door. And so the best way to do that in this is to go in and ask for a jurisdictional determination. If a project is within the jurisdiction, then there will be a pre-application phase. And once the application kicks off, there's a 135-day review timeline, so it's not a long process. Public notice will be given. The division will do a completeness review with the opportunity for deficiencies to be discussed and responded to by the applicant. And then there will be a hearing. I think something that's important about the industrial siting division is that it has a council, and the council is a citizen-based council, meaning that they're not government employees, they have other jobs. And so it is also important to talk with the DEQ to get onto a calendar that works, that your project can go forward on the timeline that you're hoping to have it go forward. Once the council holds the hearing, then a final decision will be presented through an opinion that either grants or denies the application. And within that opinion is where you'll find the additional potential conditions that other agencies, the other 19 agencies, have talked to or requested of the Industrial Siting Council. And this just gives you a quick list of some of the exemption or of all the exemptions from the Industrial Siting Act. But again, just to reiterate one more time, go in and ask for that informational meeting. Don't be that project that assumes that you don't have to go to them and then get delayed because you didn't. So the next couple slides, I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the work that we're doing on grant coordination. I think this is an important component, given the work that Maddie's been doing and talking about community readiness. So in 2021, Governor Gordon in the office reached out to the Biden administration, responded to a request about trying to work together on the potential impacts that may be occurring from the energy policies. And the interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization was created. Wyoming was the first state to create one of these, and now they're seen almost in every state across the country. So we are the pilot state for these. A lot of it is around the IIJA and the IRA funding and how those funds could be applied for in the states and benefit the communities in the states. We meet twice a month with all the federal agencies, and on those calls, our state agencies participate, as do a number of communities and organizations across the state. We are starting to see some return on these. The meetings have been good so far because they are allowing us to have coordination. And when we have questions about what our community benefit plans before the template was there, Wyoming got a briefing about community benefit plans and how rural and remote locations should think about applying. And now we're actually starting to see funding opportunities return as well. In the last round of EDA grants, the state was competitive. All of our applications were competitive, which was exciting to hear. In addition, Senator Lummis and our office work closely together. She actually has someone working directly on grants. And we, along with Senator Barrasso, hosted a summit this past June where the governor's office hosted training, because what we've found is that our communities need capacity and capability. Both of those. And so we did 2 days where we worked with over 150 participants on helping them learn how to do grant writing and grant administration. And then the next 2 days were a combination of federal and state agency folks to work directly. They talked about the grant programs that they have, and then they worked with the community and and folks that attended the conference on actual applications to help assist them in either clarifying what they might want to be getting or also reviewing the applications themselves. Something exciting that came out of this summit is from the ground up, our communities created a coalition, and the coalition is made up of over 400 members from around the state who have created cohorts that are assisting each other in either finding ways to collaborate on grant applications. They're reviewing each other's applications and helping strengthen them. If there are small communities that don't have people who can write grant applications, they're helping each other with those. So it just ended up being a great summit. We look forward to doing another one next spring. And then in between, we'll do continuing training opportunities for our communities. The state is also, the legislature funded, and the governor has put out an RFP through the state budget department for grant writing, monitoring, and management and support services. So this will be a contractor who will be able to assist with those things, but then they will also go through all the various funding opportunities. There are just so many of them. I think we heard earlier from Director Parfit about the fatigue that they were talking about. There's fatigue across the board. And so how can we streamline those and high grade them into the real opportunities that Wyoming should chase? And so this contractor will be helping us do that. And then we're also having a study done on the state's economy by Harvard. Finally, I want to mention our matching grants. The legislature put $150 million, appropriated $150 million towards the energy matching fund and $75 million towards the infrastructure matching fund. For the governor's energy matching fund, it's pretty broad in what it can do. It's meant to spur the innovation and bring transformative energy projects to Wyoming. I did include the website there for you all, and it outlines kind of the broad scope of what that means. It can match private or federal funding for projects, and the rate in a ratio of 1-to-1 state to project match. The applications will be, I know it says accepted, but they will be reviewed in a quarterly manner for the energy matching funds. So they will accept applications all the time and and then they'll be reviewed in the quarters. On the infrastructure matching fund, this is a little bit more restrictive. You have to be a state or a political subdivision of the state. That's one requirement. The second requirement is that the funds that you are looking to get at a federal level have to be IIJA funds. The funds need to, when you apply, you need to apply so that you are trying to qualify for. So that's been an interesting legal conversation about what do we mean by qualifying for IIJA. And the easy way of saying it is before you apply for IIJA funds, come in and talk and fill in the application at the state level. That makes it very clean that you're trying to use them to qualify for. Otherwise, it's a little bit different conversation. These are a ratio of 1-to-4 state to federal matching funds, and applications are received all the time, but we'll review them on the dates listed here. And I've included Russ's contact information for getting more information. Finally, I just wanted to make sure everybody has and knows who works on energy, natural resource, and environmental issues in the governor's office. So here's a list. Randall Luthie's here. I think many of you know Randall, who's the chief energy policy advisor for the governor, but this tells you who else are working on issues and the policy areas in which they're working in case you want to contact anyone.
Well, thank all three of you for very good presentations. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience or online. I don't know if we have a way of doing that, I assume. Oh, perfect.
That was great. Thank you very much. I just had a question on the last discussion about the Industrial Siting Council, and you talked about the fact that once it's permitted it's really only DEQ and the Public Service Commission that may be involved after that. I was wondering if you could just address the issue of kind of county input into those decisions. And I'm thinking specifically now of some of the transmission siting. And I'm curious how, so just recently, so there was the rail tie wind energy project that came through here, and Albany County did get involved in that and permitting, but it was pursuant to specific statutory authority related to wind energy. Transmission doesn't have that right now. So I'm just curious, I guess the fundamental question is, what, if any, role do you see exists for the counties in terms of transmission siting?
So I am also looking at Director Parfit because he's still in the room, thankfully. So there is the public hearing component of it where they can participate, but then there are also, I'm sure, Director Parfit, how about I let you answer this one? Because he's here.
Okay, so with the county governments and local governments, these projects that cross or are part of the area that's primarily affected by the project have the right to become a party by statute right now. So that's how they would be involved. And then we would have conversations, and the company would have conversations with the jurisdictions to identify early on what their concerns are. Those will be brought up during the hearing process with the Industrial Siting Council and hopefully addressed to the satisfaction of those communities.
And what we had on the slide, I think, was just to say that their local zoning rules and others would not be applicable. So that's the part that the statute takes care of.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my question is to the second presenter. I'm just looking at the community benefit plan of the Justice 40. I don't know so much about this. I'm just wondering, how exactly are the disadvantaged community determined? I don't know, probably it's part of your presentation, but not detailed, so I'm kind of confused about that. And another thing is, you spoke about issue of generating employment in the community to try to recruit people from communities that are recruiting outside. Now, my second question there is that, I mean, what type of jobs are open to this disadvantaged community? We're talking about low income paying and or high income kind of jobs. Then there could be some kind of politics there. Is political polarization a factor to look at? You know, when we're looking at the kind of the location of the community, the state they are cited, and things like that. So I'm just wondering around that.
Okay, so I think your first question there was how we identify disadvantaged communities.
Exactly.
What types of jobs will be made available in those communities? And what was your third question?
Yeah, if you answer the two questions, it will get back to the top.
Okay. So identifying disadvantaged communities, it's again, that's a requirement from DOE, but it's not exactly clear how they should be identified. And a few of us from SER attended a conference sponsored by DOE last year that was hopefully going to clarify some of these issues. And it was unfortunately clear then too that even the agencies aren't exactly always sure what they're looking for. So, you know, some agencies will say that, or, you know, have said at least at some point that those GIS screening tools could be used as a way to identify disadvantaged communities on their own. So those screening tools typically take census data and say, you know, the average income is this here, or unemployment is at this level here. It may look at, you know, racial or gender or age demographics as well. And so under some agency definitions, just the screening tools determination itself may be enough to determine whether a disadvantaged community exists someplace. But I think the better approach is probably to look at, you know, take a more holistic approach and see what's actually going on there, and, you know, maybe talk to local organizations about what they see as potential issues there. And one problem too, that we've been working to address within DOE's framework and the Biden administration's parameters is how are communities considered if they are, you know, traditionally coal reliant and could become disadvantaged in the future if, you know, coal declines. Do we need to wait for those communities to actually become disadvantaged in order for them to get help now? So unfortunately, I think it's not clear. And yeah, so I'm not sure I have a great answer to your question, but I think it would be a combination of, you know, actually working with communities to have them identify their own needs and define themselves. And then, you know, of course, using the GIS tools where appropriate. So that was the first question. Second question, so what types of jobs are being made available? I think this is something that Erik could probably speak to as well, but you know, jobs of every kind. There could be construction jobs that are just temporary. There could be engineering jobs, research jobs created. You know, there could also be peripheral job growth by, you know, if there's a population growth due to the project or the deployment of the industry in general, and the development of the technology. You know, in theory, other businesses unrelated to the energy project should be able to benefit as well. So the requirement from the Biden administration is that all jobs be, so when they say quality jobs, that means that jobs that offer a good quality of life in terms of, you know, worker safety, and then also jobs that are offered at a prevailing wage. So that's a technical legal term, but in general, it just means that they're offering a wage that is, you know, competitive within the industry. So they're jobs that should be well paying, and they're looking at, you know, whether jobs are temporary or permanent as well. So yeah, I think that there's a huge spectrum of jobs that would be created at different skill levels.
So I might also just mention a few things from a policy side and from the state side when it comes to this. It's been mentioned today, and we've talked about environmental justice, and something important that we focus on is that's not a term that's in statute in any of the organic statutes that these agencies are working off of. They're working off of executive orders that started in 1994 and have moved forward. And those and it's interesting, we sat through a Council on Environmental Quality briefing about environmental justice, and they didn't mind saying that their goal is to embed environmental justice in these policies across the agencies going forward. And that gives us a little bit of pause at the Wyoming state level, because it's what is behind that policy? What are you trying to do behind those policies? And I know, Maddie, you mentioned the identification as disadvantaged and what that connotates, and whether or not our counties and communities really want to go that direction. And so Director Parpet mentioned earlier, the state has been working alongside our agencies and with others to talk through other avenues that we could also give to our communities if they were going after grants. And there's a screening tool, a state screening tool that's not based on these executive orders and on regulations, and some things that aren't even in regulation. As Maddie mentioned, there aren't agreed upon terms of, it's a term of art that's not, it doesn't even have one definition across all the agencies. So we're looking at developing these screening tools. DEQ has the first one, working with YDOT and others to get screening tools so that if you're doing an application and you want to say you qualify for a certain reason, look at those state tools as well and say that based on the state tool, which is based on statute, you qualify. And the DEQ tool explains what it is within the statute and why. We've shared this through the interagency working group at the federal level. They know that we're doing this. They encourage us to have these screening tools and to present them as alternative options, because that is in every grant. It says use the CEQ tool, or if you don't think that it fits and you have something else, feel free to present additional information. So that's what the state is trying to also give, is additional information. And instead of saying disadvantaged, the DEQ one says special area. And again, we're looking at statutorily based information that people can use when going after some of these grants, or as you're identifying beneficiaries of the grants as well. The federal agencies say that rural and remote is an important component, even if we don't want to call, we don't need to call it disadvantaged. We can say it's rural and remote, and that your projects affect a local community, and that is good enough as well.
So real quick question for Jen. I think maybe others can comment as well. Federal government has a program called Fast 41 to kind of streamline permitting, or at least make the agencies work together. So your comment on NEPA, I mean, agencies sometimes don't like to work together. They like to do their own things, but sometimes there's programs within government to make them work together and make a lead agency kind of coordinate across the other agencies. Has Wyoming looked at possibly using Fast 41 or other programs to help coordinate that effort, at least on the federal side for permitting?
So is your question whether or not we've looked at the federal Fast 41 to use it in Wyoming?
Yes, sorry.
So that's very similar to what we are using on the nuclear project, and a very similar approach that we went through. So asking our state agencies first to come together to identify if you have a role or responsibility, identify what that role or responsibility is, and then kind of track the agency's progress as they move forward. And so it is very similar to that dashboard that we see at the federal level.
And I do have an online question as well. It's from Jose Moran, who is an attorney at Baker McKenzie. This question is for Madeline Lewis. First and foremost, thanks very much for your presentation. Do community energy production projects benefit from any sort of fast track process to connect the power generation plant to the grid?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer to that question, and that's why I'm looking over at Jen, because yeah, we work on different sides of this, but yeah, I'm not, nothing comes to mind right now. I can definitely get back to Jose with an answer though.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room?
Thank you. Sorry that I'm asking too much questions. I'm still also wondering around the community civic engagement when it comes to citing some high risk energy plants like the perceived high risk, nuclear plants and the rest. Well, I don't know. Is there a kind of program to re-educate and reorient the community to kind of change or disabuse their old sit-tight tradition or perception of the kind of risk that some kind of power plant like nuclear power plants could pose? And if there are, I know there should be. Now, if a community insists that they still don't trust the safety of this kind of nuclear plants, irrespective of the kind of orientation and kind of education you've given them, do companies or investors or partners still go ahead to cite this kind of investment in those in those communities?
So on the nuclear side, I will say that there are a number of efforts underway to do education. Taking county commissioners, mayors, business leaders and whatnot from the community and surrounding communities and areas and across the state to some of our partner locations like INL, which is the Idaho National Lab, so that they can see firsthand what the technology is and be able to ask questions of the experts. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a process that allows for comments and for participation by those affected communities, and it's through that review process that those concerns will be considered.
And I think you also kind of posed the question as to how that works with the investors that are looking at the project too. I don't know if that's more of Erik, your kind of purview. I guess the importance of the community involvement early on, maybe.
No question. I think for us, community outreach has been priority one since day one. And we feel like that Wyoming has been by and large a very even if they don't either have fully agree with what you're doing or fully, maybe take objection to what you're doing, they still will hear you out. And to that extent, our position has been is that not only to Madeline's point, yes, prevailing wedge is the mantra we live by when it comes to, community, how we're making an impact in the community benefits as it relates to federal funding. But for us, we're also thinking as far as in terms of getting community buy-in of wanting, our mantra is keep Wyoming competitive, keep Wyoming's industries competitive by, whether it's the hundreds of jobs in trona mining or the jobs at power plants or gas processing. We want to help those people continue to have jobs, those jobs to not only be there but also grow over the next decades.
I might go back to the question. I think that we were saying that we'd get back to you on the, I think it was Jose's online. There was a public comment period that closed about 2 weeks ago from DOE on their Office of Grid reliance or resiliency or something. So they were looking at the idea of how could you expedite, if you will, transmission line permitting. The interesting part of that is it included a number of provisions that we heard about earlier from DESA on timelines and streamlining. However, in it, it is very clear that you still have to go through the FERC process. So it almost creates another process on top of the FERC process. And so whether or not that's streamlining, I'll leave that up for you all to decide.
Thanks, Jen. And that kind of brings up another factor as we talk about streamlining and certainty in an uncertain environment when you have these new projects. You know, how do you, and this may be for all of you, but how do you see the agencies balancing that efficiency with a proper analysis of the projects when you have so many agencies that potentially could have ideas on what should or shouldn't be going on?
So I mean, at a state level, I feel like our agencies, we have great staff with strong goals and missions of their agencies, and they're dedicated and they work hard and are solution oriented. And so they will do their job and ensure that they review and do what is necessary. But through our statutes, we have some very strong timelines, and I think those timelines are aggressive, and we have staff that are willing to meet those and meet them while also assuring that we're doing our job as the government in the review.
Yeah, I would say from a practical perspective, the two agencies that we have the most interface with are in Wyoming is the DEQ and also the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission is the regulatory body that we go to establish our to file and establish our CCS unit. And the sequencing between when you get your permits or you actually drill your wells between when you actually unitize is not as crystal clear as, you know, but at the same time though, to Jen's point, the personnel, the professionals that we're working with at the DEQ and the Oil and Gas and the Conservation Commission get that. So they tend to take a much more constructive, they always take a constructive approach as it relates to, you know, when we're kind of coming through to our deadlines and coming through to our requirements that we have to do from a either permitting perspective or a filing perspective, they totally understand the balance. And we've actually had joint dialogue with all agencies, with both agencies together. So having that kind of feedback, and not only, but having that kind of openness to having that type of collaboration, just speaks to the environment and the framework that we have here in Wyoming.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be a common theme, is that Wyoming is ahead of the ball on a lot of these jurisdictions. It's a collaborative environment where if you want to get a project done, you sit down with the right people and you you talk through, hey, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty here. How do we get through this? Does anyone have experience or see how other states may be handling it differently and potentially what they could be doing to be more successful?
Well, I know you see quite a few states who are now trying to file to obtain primacy for the Class 6 permits at a time when, you know, now that, particularly now after the BIL and the IRA acts bills, you know, there's this, basically overnight you've started this new industry with CCS, and so you have a lot more people who are filing Class 6 permits with the EPA, and so their docket is just backed up. So now you have jurisdictions specifically Louisiana, I think, are still, Todd, you may have a better idea, but they're still in public comments as to their primacy, obtaining their primacy for Louisiana. Texas still hasn't, I think Texas has applied, but I think they're further behind. But yeah, no, and again, this is something that Wyoming has had for over a decade now. So again, just to reiterate that point, I think, you know, now that this is kind of, this whole new industry has blossomed, a lot of jurisdictions are kind of rushing to kind of put in the framework that looks a lot like what was here in Wyoming.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that with CCS specifically, I think there's this problem where geology doesn't align neatly with state boundaries. And so if you have a project that is, even approaching the federal state checkerboard or, approaching the border of one of Wyoming's neighboring states, you're going to run into a lot of regulatory uncertainty. I mean, both with states like Colorado that really have no developed CCS legislation. Not only is there some uncertainty there, but even if they did have legislation, it's unclear, how our framework would interplay. So that's something that we've been looking into along with the DEQ to provide some clarity on how regulatory certainty could be achieved through, not only interagency, but interstate and federal cooperation as well, as we're trying to expand our CCS industry.
And I'm not as familiar with the other states, but what I will say is the National Governors Association on their website has links to different policy areas and topics. And for most of them, they do an analysis of state by state and what the states have done from at their legislative level that they've either passed or are looking at doing, and also at the executive level. So that is a resource that you could go to if you're interested in seeing what some of the other states have done in some of these areas. One of the things I have heard quite a bit for Wyoming is that our energy IQ across the state is such that it makes also it easier to come in and want to work in Wyoming is because of that IQ level.
And then we do have another question from our virtual audience, followed by another question back here in the room. So our online question says, hello, my name is Lizzie, and I'm conducting some research on Justice 40. I'm wondering if Wyoming has any plans at the state level to pass legislation or create policies in support of Justice 40's goals.
Not at this time.
Have to turn it on. So I guess my question comes, obviously, we've seen a lot of pushback regarding transportation, especially in North and South Dakota and the issues I'd say maybe generating from lack of landowner participation early on. How do you guys have either tools or methods you guys are planning on using to prevent some of the issues that we're seeing in our northern friends?
I'm just for clarity, Connor, you're talking about like the interstate CO2 pipelines that were like,
yeah, that's
right,
correct. Yeah, interstate.
Well, one way is to I don't want to comment on any other specific project, but I think for us, again, we have found that there's plenty of CO2 here in Wyoming's boundaries where you don't have to worry about traveling cross state. So that's why part of the reason why we focus here. And secondly, one of the things that we do love it, I think what we find is important is that we're in a state that's very hospitable to industry. This is this state has a very long history of oil and gas production. I mean, between the Powder River Basin, the Green River Basin, you name it, the Bighorn Basin, this state knows energy, and as to Jenner's point, it has a high energy IQ. So when you're coming in talking about pipelines, that's not foreign to them. In fact, the folks that we deal with, the landowners that we deal with, are very sophisticated, and they understand exactly what it is that you need, and they understand exactly what the market is for what you want. So so I think to that extent, I think the answer is, Connor, is education, right? And engagement. And we have found that for our project, that education is already so high that it's a very small gap to have to fill as far as what we're doing versus what has been done in this state for decades and decades.
Sorry again, I still on the Justice 40 and on the community, because that's where I'm super interested in. Okay, you just mentioned that Wyoming has high level of education literacy. Now, in case of other states that do not have such opportunity and still implementing the Justice 40, how do you train the local skill, the local labor in the disadvantaged community whose skill are not particularly market competitive, in being adaptive to the new market competition, especially as it regards renewable energy and renewable investment, pulling them out of the coal plants, then integrating them into the new industry. So how is there a program to get them trained, and who sponsors such program? Is it the federal government, the state government, or the private investor, or is a shared responsibility? Thank you.
I just, real quick, just for the benefit of the room, could someone give a primer of what Justice 40 is?
Yes, I'm happy to. So Justice 40 is that initiative that came out of Executive Order 14008 in 2021, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And so that's an executive order that states that 40% of benefits from certain federal funding, including a lot of funding under the IRA for energy projects, must flow to disadvantaged communities. And so it's that 40% metric created in that order. To make sure I'm understanding your question, is it about how local community members or people in existing industries would be retrained for, retrained to be successful or, marketable for these emerging industries? I think, I'm sure that Jen will have a lot to say on this as well, but from our perspective, it seems like community college collaborations would be key, and that's something that we've been working on. I think, it's not going to be realistic for someone who has established a career someplace and has a family in, Gillette to come down to Laramie and get another 4-year degree. So I think some of those community colleges, those community college programs are going to be critical. And there's also a program called the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, which again, I think Jen will probably be able to speak more to, but through that partnership, it's a coalition led by, I believe, the governor's office with the Wyoming Community College Commission and the University of Wyoming that prioritizes funding for these retraining programs and places, renewable energy training programs in colleges where they don't exist yet. So I believe that there's a renewable energy program that's slated for, to be built out at Central Wyoming College in the next couple of years, and similar programs like that.
Yeah, and I think to your question about who holds the responsibility for it, I think it's all of the above in that list that you gave. Under the program as it's listed, as Maddie said, it's 40% of the benefits need to flow. As we've had conversations through the IWG and getting clarification on what exactly that means and what they're looking for, it's not 40% of every project. It's the overall dollars. So out of the IIJA dollars and out of the IRA dollars. And so because a number of our communities were concerned that they couldn't meet 40% of the benefits would flow if they applied for a grant, so they just weren't applying. And they said, don't not apply, make sure that you apply and just say how you might try to tackle that. Or this is where the rural and remote components and that you're doing local hire comes into play. At the state of Wyoming level, we do have WIP, the Wyoming Innovative Partnership, that includes our Department of Workforce Services as well as the entities that Maddie listed. And they are looking at additional funding to go into retraining some of those programs. And then there are other additional programs and services offered from the Department of Workforce Services. They do get some federal funding. So They have a number of programs that they offer into communities that they also offer to companies that are coming in as well. And so they into industries. So for example, our uranium industry is coming back online because they basically shuttered in 2019 due to pricing. And so through the Department of Workforce Services and some collaborations with our community college out of Douglas, there are some training programs and efforts underway.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to that. This isn't really relate to the question, but it is a point I think it's important, particularly when you're thinking about, you know, applying for funding, getting funding, is that when we learned this in our process is that this is an iterative process. You do, just because there's an application deadline and you submit it and it doesn't go into a black box and then you just find out 6 months later what happens. You get multiple bites at the apple. That doesn't mean that you can just, you know, you offer a full-fledged application of everything that they're asking for. But at the same time, though, you know, they will come back and ask, hey, can we see some more of what this is? Or can you kind of supply, supply the backup for where you're showing this? So it's much more of a dialogue and a living process as more, and it's not just, hey, you missed this, so you didn't get it. So I think it's important as you think about, because I think what you said about, just still apply. I mean, you still, get your application and do what you can, on that first application deadline. And then as you go through the process, you will have opportunities to where if the agency or whoever it is has specific questions about something, or they want to see more of one of the segments of your project, they will open that door and give you that opportunity.
Yeah, and I would just add, even if you're denied, there's still feedback in that process. And, the phase 1, 2, 3, 4 under carbon safe just keeps coming up, depending on obviously the government's funding. So, it's not only bites at the apple during your process, but you'll have potentially more bites of the apple, even if you're denied.
Yeah, and I think that's a good pitch for the need for ongoing engagement, even if something were to happen that couldn't hurt your application if you were continuing to work in the community and get continuing community support. But I just wanted to bring it back to another point on the question, which was, the role of private industry in creating job growth. And I think it's just going to be a necessity for businesses when they need employees. They need to, figure out these training opportunities and work with local organizations to make sure that they have the resources and the workforce that they need. And the example that comes to mind for me is not related to energy specifically, but I live in Sheridan currently. And a couple of years ago, they lost their welding instructor at Sheridan College. And so that was an issue for, students who were hoping to get certified in welding, but also for local manufacturers. There's a large manufacturing presence up there, and they were all of a sudden wondering where they were going to get welders. And so I think what happened is that they ended up bringing in their own person to lead the welding program for a while. And I think, out of necessity, things will, come together like that when you have a growing workforce needs or dynamic workforce needs.
Brian and Erik both mentioned or talked about it a little bit. I think on the denied or discouraged, you have these concept papers now. So they've kind of changed the process as we talk about, it's iterative. On this, now they're really looking at these concept papers. So they're shorter applications. And then the feedback that applicants are seeing is you're either encouraged or you're discouraged, but it checks boxes on why you might be discouraged so that you can make a choice if you want to put in the time and the effort to try to figure out how you can move that needle and actually become a project that might be accepted under the full application process. And it's something I did not mention, but I should mention is if you have projects and you are applying, let our office know and let the federal delegation know. I think Maddie mentioned the WBC and some of the other state agencies do provide support letters, but our 4 offices also have a process by which we review requests for grant support letters. And so if these projects are being weighed against each other and the Wyoming projects have letters from the state of Wyoming at a pretty strong level and the others don't, then that's really helpful for your application is what we've heard from state agencies, and the vice versa is true. If you don't have those letters of support, but your competitors do out of their states, that might be the deciding factor.
That's good. And it goes back to finding the right partners too, because a lot of these aren't really done, a developer doesn't go out and just do, file for one of these grants. Like usually you're looking at, and obviously SER is a good partner. Can you talk a little bit about finding the right partners and, kind of creating your consortium in a way that gives you the best chance of success for some of these grants?
Well, I can only speak to our experience. And as I mentioned in my presentation, SER has been not just a partner on the Carbon Safe Award. They have been a partner from day one in terms of making their experts available to us from a subsurface basis, making, Tara helped us in drafting our first pore space lease. So I think it's really are you in the right community? Are you in the right jurisdiction that is going to be supporting what it is you're doing? And again, we were fortunate to come into a jurisdiction that had thought about carbon capture and storage 15 years ago and put in the early framework. So it was that we weren't coming in with any novel ideas. I think going into a state or community that that is going to be welcome and that's going to be supportive, I think finding the right, whether it's a educational institute or whoever it is, I think those partners will come to you naturally.
Yeah, and just wanted to get back to something we were talking about, keep Wyoming competitive, but also at the same time, Maddie, you spoke to some of the processes evolving and unknown, and some of the efforts that you and people that you're working with are going through with the agencies to try to say, hey, Wyoming has unique facts. We want to fast track these projects because they're important to these communities, but they don't necessarily fit under what you're calling disadvantaged communities or whatever. How successful have those discussions been? Are the agencies receptive to change, and how quickly can they change to get some of these projects to be more successful to the extent they're not?
I would actually say probably Jen has been more involved in conversations with DOE about, how their process might not totally be a good match for Wyoming and how it just, doesn't overlay quite correctly. But do you want to speak to that then?
So yes, we have talked to them about that, and they say put in the best application that you can and that you're able to. From the state side, if a community is looking at doing an application or a project sponsor, that is something that they have to look at the risks of and what they're willing to commit to. I think the state, we have an executive order, that a directive into our cabinet, that when it comes to the environmental justice provisions and then the executive orders, we take a hard look at that because of the potential long-term ramifications and litigation issues that could come from those executive orders. And so that we had a press release that came out last week from the governor saying we decided and opted not to accept grant money because there were just too many strings attached that took it too far. And the same is true as what Director Parfit was talking about this morning when he kicked off the conversation. And so from a state side, we are looking at it from a lot of different angles as far as long-term impacts. And we try to share the information we have and why we're making the choices we are with our communities and others that talk to us. But then ultimately at the end of the day, it's everybody's own determination.
Yeah, and I think within, SER, our primary contact or, our instruction from DOE has been a lot through feedback on our community benefit plans and applications. And I think, that's been helpful to an extent. And overall, we've had a lot of success, but, despite them saying that, we're looking for these specific metrics and these value systems to be in place where you're operating, just providing a narrative description of how communities and energy communities in particular operate. It seems like that was compelling for some of the plans that we submitted. But I think too, as Jen mentioned in her talk, you do see DOE and practically every other federal agency building out a separate branch now to address environmental justice. So, entire divisions now. And so I think that's giving them more capacity to address and refine what they're looking for and provide a little bit more clarity for, especially states like Wyoming, which are top energy producers and somehow still don't fit within the energy narratives that they want. So I think we'll continue to see it evolve.
And then getting back to the environmental justice situation or, concepts that you had discussed, it seems like each agency is kind of left to its own to figure out what that means, each, community to a certain extent. Is there opportunity for overlap? Like if you have different environmental justice issues that you have to address, as well as like from an investment standpoint, maybe that's more of a question for Erik. You have these applications where you're trying to address some of those concerns, but then you're also looking at it from, well, what kind of investors, what are investors concerned with too? And you're living in this world where it's not necessarily clear what those words mean. How are people navigating that for better certainty to move their projects forwards?
So I can say a resource to look at if you want information about how the agencies are being directed on environmental justice. There is a website on environmental justice. It's part of the White House's website. There's an advisory council as well around this issue. And then every department has a scorecard now that was approved last year. And so every agency is being evaluated on the scorecard. And then so that scorecard can be found on the agency's websites, and it can also be found at the White House's website. And so that will give some indicators. And now that it is a lot, they look a lot of the same information is found on each of them. And it just might be how far along they are in reaching some of those goals or at a different place. But those can be found at the White House's website.
Well, yeah, and just speaking to uncertainty around environmental justice, this was a theme that was brought up earlier today as well. I think, you are seeing agencies build out their capacity to address environmental justice issues, but at the same time, there's still no statutory federal authority for environmental justice. And so, as if there should be an administration change in the future, it's not totally clear what it would look like moving forward.
Yeah, just to the point, environmental justice is I think the EPA came out with a memorandum last year, or no, earlier this year, that as part of states' applications for primacy over the Class 6 project, over Class 6 well permits, environmental justice was going to be a big part of that application process. So, I mean, to your point, as far as so how do if you think about investments, if you're thinking, I want to try to accelerate and try to be in a jurisdiction where I have certainty that I'm going to have a Class 6 permit in the next 2 to 3 years, and you're in a state that is filed for primacy or was planning to file primacy, like in the meantime, they're going to file a permit with the EPA, and that's going to be a very long process.
Yeah, and I think from an investor standpoint, the question was more along the lines of do you have investors that are concerned more with that you are complying with environmental justice under the regulatory scheme, or do they have their own metrics that they're looking for if you have like private investors?
No, I would say conscientious investing is always a big part of our protocol. I mean, we're not trying to do it. We always want to see where the intangible benefits of what we're doing. So is it, I mean, is our metric what we define from the EPA? No, but does that mean but it still is something that's just as impactful and as important to us from an investment standpoint?
Well, I think that was what I had, unless there are other questions. Perfect. I think let's thank the panel for their time and insight today. I think it was great. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hand it over to Holly.
Thanks, guys. That was great. And by the way, Erik, it's a two-way partnership street. We've really appreciated all the work with you guys. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Look around. You are in the elite company of people who stay till the end of a conference. So nice job. And thanks everyone for the discussion, for being here or being online. Really appreciate it. A quick reminder that this conference has been approved for 4.75 general CLE credits in Wyoming, and approval is pending but expected in Colorado. So, and it's also been approved for 4.75 credits with the Association of Professional Landmen. So we recorded it. We will make it available online soon. Thank you all so much for your engagement, for your time, for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next year, as well as other events at the School of Energy Resources, Hop School, or College of Law. So thank you all so much. Please stay engaged and safe travels home. Thanks.